NASCAR DFS preview. I'm AustYn with the Sports Chief, and we're going to Las Vegas Motor Speedway. So this is the first race of the round of 12 for the NASCAR playoffs in the NASCAR Cup Series. So what we're looking at today, Las Vegas Motor Speedway is a 1.5-mile oval. As you all know, it's kind of banked for sure. It's definitely one of those cookie cutter tracks. Similar to, you call it like an intermediate track. So similar to Charlotte, Texas. It's owned by the same Speedway Corporation out of Charlotte. But it's definitely one of those cookie cutter style tracks. So your faster drivers, your faster cars normally perform pretty well here. So what we're looking at in terms of making our lineup for DraftKings this week is I'm looking at, of course, past history without practice. You know, the season's winding down, so that's getting a little old talking about the practice, but totally different season in terms of picking lineups. I'm looking at past history, not necessarily just at Vegas. I am looking at the intermediate tracks in general. And yeah, so I'm looking at all those. So I'm looking at Charlotte. I'm looking at Texas. I'm looking at Atlanta. I'm looking at Homestead. I'm looking at Kansas. All of those tracks put together. And then what I did in terms of picking my lineup, I looked at those finishers. Whoever was in the top 10 most of the time, that's who I ended up going with. So I put in a formula to try to pick the drivers that I felt best with, because there's a lot of drivers actually in our lineup today, and in what DraftKings gave us in pricing-wise, there's a lot of drivers that are in really attractive spots, and I think they want you to go ahead and pick those drivers for sure. This is definitely more of a one lineup kind of strategy. It's not a tournament strategy in the sense that I picked the highest point total I think possible. But I think that this is a very effective winning lineup. I have 6 drivers that I feel confident could actually win the race, which you don't get too often. So yeah, let's go ahead and check it out and see what DraftKings has given us here at Vegas. So Kevin Harvick is starting on the pole at 11.7. Brad Keselowski starting in 12th at 11.4. Denny Hamlin starting in 10th at 11,000. Martin Truex Jr. starting in 11th at 10.6. Joey Logano starting in 5th at 10.3, and rounding out our 6K drivers is Kyle Busch starting in 2nd at 10,000. So we have 6 drivers in the 10,000 range. And as you can tell here, William Byron starting in 28th at 9.4, probably going to be chalky. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. starting in 33rd at 7.8, could be chalky. Ryan Newman starting in 27th. Christopher Bell in 26th. There's some good drivers that are starting towards the back, just because they didn't perform well last week. Now, as I explained earlier, one of the big things that I looked at, I was looking at the intermediate track results, right? And one of my better results of the season was actually at Texas, and I used this strategy there, and we had really good success there. So this is what I'm sticking with it for sure. So Kevin Harvick undoubtedly is one of the better drivers on the 1.5-mile circuits. He's probably the best driver. No, probably. Fantasy-wise, as you can tell here, fantasy points per race, 64.3, which is insane. The good thing about Vegas, now we have 267 laps, so not as many laps as usual in terms of the short tracks. Like, say, at short tracks last week, our strategy was to pick 3 or 5 drivers. Pick as many as you could, 2 or 3, and make your lineup like that. And that was effective. Here's not so much. So you don't have as many laps to deal with. And laps led is important, but not as important as you would think. Like, it's not going to be something where someone's going to lead 300 laps because they're not even running 300 laps, right? So the Cup Series also, they have 9 sets of tires, so they're going to be pitting for fresh tires all the time. Vegas, it seemed like in the truck race anyway, they were wearing down pretty quick. The tires, so to, in that regard. Also, they're not running the same tire compound as they ran earlier on in the season at Vegas, which makes Vegas not as important looking at earlier on in February, I believe it was. Joey Logano won that race. Now, they are running the same left side tire compound, but the rights are normally what carries more load, and they burn easier. So that's what you're really looking at in terms of comparability, and they've changed it up. They made it more of a high grip situation. What does that tell me? That tells me that track position is ultra important. They're going to be able to grip the track, rip it, and tire wear may not be that important. Goodyear may have came out with a tire that doesn't wear as easily. So, a lot of your drivers like William Byron, they may end up finishing like 25th because they can't get past people, right? So that is uber important. I think track position is going to be a big deal. Now, again, I looked at these, I believe it was it was 7 races with Charlotte, Texas, Atlanta, Homestead, Kansas, and I did put Vegas in there as well. Looped them in and tried to get an average finish formula, and also in their worst finish, I made that an outlier, so then I put together those 2 numbers as well. Now, I only did it for like 7 drivers, just because I did it for the lineup that I picked, because I could easily tell that it was pretty spot on. You can kind of give it an eye test, and I go to Racing Reference to look at this, so you can kind of punch those numbers in, but this is what I did. So right away, it was easy to tell who the best driver was on those tracks, on the mile-and-a-half tracks this season. And he actually is not in the NASCAR playoffs right now, but it's Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney is starting in 15th spot. Let me tell you a little bit about Ryan Blaney. His average finish at Vegas is 10th. That's a check mark for us here in this lineup. So his average finish is better than where he's starting. His average finish on intermediate tracks, now those are the mile-and-a-half tracks that I have talked about, 7.7. That is his average finish altogether. No outlier, 7.7. That's even better. So, in reality, his average finish is 8 on these tracks. With that outlier, and I can't remember exactly which race it was, but it wasn't a terrible outlier because with the outlier, his average finish was 5.7. So that improved him like 2 spots, right? That's amazing. He's $9,100. Ryan Blaney could go out there, and he actually has led in most of those races. Could easily win this race. He's in 15th. I believe they definitely have the program down pat. With a new tire, he could have an advantage too, being that he's really just racing for a win. And in that price point, it's hard to pass that up. Math tells me you got to go Ryan Blaney. Another driver that stuck out to me that was very obvious is Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch is starting at 9th position. He is $8,700, and I do not think that Ryan Blaney or Kurt Busch will be picked that heavily, and I think this could move in our favor. Kurt Busch's average finish on intermediate tracks is 9.3. Again, he's right there at that spot. He's 9th. His average finish is right where he's starting, which is great. With that outlier that he had, and he actually had a really bad finish. It was like in the 30s, I believe, or upper 20s, like 29th, 30-something. With that outlier, he had a 6.7 average finish. Moves him up 2 more spots. That's 7th. His average finish is 7th in 7 races. That is great. Cannot get enough of that. And he didn't even win a race. So that means he's in the top 7 all the time, right? I think he'll compete. Track position is going to be major. He's in the NASCAR playoffs. Book Kurt Busch in your lineup. That gives us with an average remaining salary of $8,000, right? So here's where it gets a little tricky. In my other strategies that I was trying to implement this week, J.J. Yaley is in, this is where I would cut it off at Greg Alding, right? So Greg Alding, in terms of those slower cars, the second or third tier even, third tier cars, you're looking at the fastest driver is the car, so to speak, is probably the 27, which Greg Alding is driving for. It's either Premium Motorsports or Rick Ware. I'm not sure how the ownership, it changes so often. But he's in a pretty well-sponsored Panini America trading cards car. He's got a little bit of money there. So he's in 30th. I think he'll end up around that spot. Probably 28th, 29th is realistic. J.J. Yaley's in 37th, and he's in the 77 Spire Motorsports car. That's probably the fastest among that third tier. It's faster than Hill's cars, faster than Fincham. He could finish like 30th, 31st, and that's a little bit of legroom there for sure. Like if you went Harvick, you got to put J.J. Yaley in your lineup to me. So I'm not doing it today because It didn't really match my strategy, but if you're doing a lot of tournament lineups, J.J. Yaley is a great option. Corey LaJoie is one that I tried to play with as well. So Corey LaJoie, average, you see some 15th, some 16th, some 19th, some early 20th place finishes. That's not bad. And Corey LaJoie is also a great option if you want to pay a little bit more and you don't want to go Yaley. Go LaJoie, but you got to cut some corners in other places. It just didn't line up for me. I didn't like the 6 drivers that I had compared to what I did here. But those are great options. Daniel Suarez is a decent option too, but you're looking at about a 25th place finish. I noticed that Michael McDowell finished in the top 20 a lot. If Michael McDowell was starting in 25th or 6th, I'd have him in my lineup because his average finish was around like 20th. But he's starting in 17th, so it's not worth it. John Hunter Nemechek, 25th, is a little valuable. And I'll cut it off at Busher there, but it's a little valuable for John Hunter Nemechek, just not great. He could get like 19th or 18th, and that's not bad. That's 6 spots gained, but, that's if you're stacking Harvick or those very expensive drivers. Now, to move on, in terms of finishing spots, right? So I'm going to scroll up here. The other driver that was very obvious to me that was the 3rd best performer that I put together is Martin Truex Jr. So he's starting in 11th. And Brad Keselowski, he was just as good. I didn't punch the numbers in for him, but he was right around this number. Martin Truex Jr. on intermediate tracks is 10.3 is his number, right? Oh, and by the way, Kurt Busch, one thing to note about Kurt, and I was scared to death about this, Kurt is really bad at Vegas. His average finish is 22.5, but, I'm hoping people see that and they scurry away from him. Hey, we're going with him because of the mile-and-a-half track program. Truex, back to Truex. Average finish of 11.4, so he's in that 11th spot. 2 wins at Vegas. Intermediate average finish is 10.3. A little better than where he's at, so we're positive there. He had a really bad finish in like 29th or so he had an outlier. That with that outlier taking out of the equation, 7.2. Average finish of 7th. Truex is just worth it in that regard. So if he gets us some, because I think Ryan Blaney could win the race. Truex gives us more value than Logano. Logano was very good, don't get me wrong. He led a lot of laps on these tracks. It seemed like it was Logano, Harvick, and Truex who led most of the laps in the races. Blaney in 4th probably. But the starting position, I kind of scared me a little bit. Chase Elliott's also a valuable option. I think Chase could contend, but I do like Truex in that starting spot in 11th. We had Austin Hill in the truck race last night, and he was in 11th. I think you just got to be patient because at the end of the race, he got up to the front and didn't look back. So looking at Martin Truex Jr. in that spot at 10.6. So that gives us an average salary of $7,200. And here's where you got to kind of pick and choose. So I'm going to cut it off. Again, Ricky Stenhouse is going to be heavily owned. Cut it off at the Benedetto there. He's going to be heavily owned, I believe. And he very well could finish. He finished like 3rd at Vegas earlier this year, and he finished 4th at another track, and I can't remember exactly where that was. Which made me think, man, his average is going to be good, but then you had a 40th, you had a 39th, you had a 30-something. Like, ugh. So he's very inconsistent, and you know that about, if you play this, you know that Ricky's very inconsistent. His average finishes, fantasy points per race is 22, which Chad Fincham has a higher number. I mean, less to run with one race, but, I mean, he's like Corey LaJoie. It's like picking that. That's expensive. And Corey's starting in 31st, so anyway. One driver that really impressed me is AustYn Dillon. So AustYn Dillon, we had him picked at Texas, like I stated earlier, and he won the race. He's really shown that he has got a fast car, and he's trying to win the NASCAR. He's trying to win the championship, and that's awesome, right? His value's great, 34.8. That's crazy good. It's better than Boyer. It's better than William Byron. It's almost as good as Kyle Busch, right? I'm going AustYn Dillon. He's 7,600. Reason for that, his average finish here is 14.7, which is okay. Not great in terms of where he's starting, but his intermediate numbers, 11.1. 11th average finish, pretty good. With the outlier, he had a 27th at Kansas. Took that out, 8.5. Wow, that's really good. That is amazing on intermediate tracks. Not a lot of drivers have a top 10 average finish on all 7 races. Going with AustYn Dillon in 7th. And here's where it got a little tricky for me. I wanted to pull the trigger on Alex Bowman. Alex Bowman, of course, is in the NASCAR playoffs. He actually led a lot of laps at one of the tracks. I can't remember exactly. Trying to remember. I think it's Charlotte. But he led like 150 laps, right? His average finish at Vegas is 20.7, which is not great. His intermediate record was 18.9. Did not like that at all. That's not good. That's not great. That's like his average finish is 20.7 because he ran for BK Racing at Vegas. You know what I mean? And that's like right around the same number. Not consistent enough for me to go with him. Another driver's right around that range. So realistically, I'm picking from these numbers at 7,000, right? So I can't really go any lower than Buescher. Christopher Bell didn't have the consistency to me either. He's in 26th. He very well could finish a little higher. You're just a risk. This is risk. It's gambling. And then Ryan Newman in 27th. His average finish was around that where Bowman was. Worse, actually, but I couldn't do it. Now, I did find another driver that blew me out of the water, and I'm like, man, I got to go with him, and that's Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick is starting in 14th spot. Tyler Reddick has an average finish of 18th at Vegas, which you can't really go with because I believe he has one start, maybe two. On the intermediate circuit, 11.6, 12th, better than his starting position. Also, with that outlier, is 10.5, so he's right there at 10 and 11. Going with Tyler Reddick, he could easily get us a top 10. Great value there. He'll give you more than Bowman, so going with him there. And it was fairly easy for me after this. So a driver that I'm really high on is Cole Custer. He's starting in 22nd spot. He has won at Kentucky. He has a win at Kentucky, excuse me. And actually, the Xfinity Series is using the same tire compound as Kentucky, so that's interesting to note. Cole Custer, starting in 22nd spot. He's our highest starting position driver. Cole Custer on intermediate track, 16.4. Pretty good. Not bad. Better than Bowman. And he's starting in 22nd. Also, with that outlier, because he did have a really bad finish, and I can't remember the number, but it was like 12.7. So you're looking at 13th spot. Cole Custer gets us top 15. We're having money rolling in. I firmly believe these 6 drivers could win the race, and they all could finish in the top 10. It's realistic. And the starting positions are good enough to where Cole Custer's going to pass some cars. Tyler Reddick's going to pass some cars. Blaney's probably going to go to the front pretty early. What's he got to lose, right? Kurt Busch is going to be hanging around there. Dillon's going to be hanging around there. And I think Truex ultimately would be my pick to win the race. But honestly, Ryan Blaney to me is a great option. He's really good at mile and a half this year. So that's it. So let's clean it up here a little bit. Show you what Sports Chief is rolling out. So we got Martin Truex Jr. at 10-6. Ryan Blaney at 9-1. Kurt Busch at 8-7. Austin Dillon at 7-6. Tyler Reddick at 6-9. Again, we're going with those 2 RCR cars that got us money at Texas. Feel confident going with them again. And going with Cole Custer starting in 22nd. I kind of feel like this is a lineup very similar to what I had there. But anyway, that's what we're rolling with there. So hope you learned something there. Again, do your own strategy. It's fun to play around and see what you can do there. But according to skill and statistics and everything, if you're a gambling guy or girl or whatever, you gotta. If you love the DFS aspect of it, it's amazing to go through all those statistics, pick the driver. Like Cole Custer, floored me. The fact that he's got better than Bowman. And a lot of those top-tier drivers, people are going to be going Byron. People are going to be going Stenhouse. This is the kind of lineup that could win you $50,000. If you pick those drivers that not a lot of people are on, but, man, they're going to be competitive. And they very well could, like at Kentucky, Cole Custer ended up winning. At Texas, Austin Dillon ended up winning, and Tyler Reddick was second. A pit strategy could put them up front. I don't think tire wear is going to be that important. I don't think laps led is going to be that important. We have a little bit of track position there to play with Blaney. He could finish 7th, 6th. You creep up a little bit. Busch could get 5th. Truex could get 5th. You know what I'm saying? You got drivers that could finish in the top 5. Really like this lineup. Anyway, if you like what you see here, if you got any questions, comments, or concerns, just hit us up on YouTube at the bottom down there. Hit the bell notification. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. hit that bell notification to let you know whenever we go live here. But the season's winding down, so we're going to finish off strong here at the Sports Chief, at the Sports Chief on Twitter. Hit us up there, subscribe to our channel, and yeah, on Instagram as well. So hope you have a great Las Vegas weekend, race weekend.